The Atheist Debates Patreon Project presents Deuteronomy 22:13-21, Non-Virgin Brides. Hey everybody, how you doing? I hope you're doing well. I'm going to start by actually just reading the passage because this came up in a couple of different contexts and I saw somebody share it, but somebody also asked me about it. And it was worth putting out a video because I've talked about other things even within this same chapter of Deuteronomy that are incredibly problematic. But we'll start by pulling it up and reading it for all of you, and that is Deuteronomy 22:13-21. If any man take a wife and go into her and hate her and give occasion of speech against her and bring up an evil name upon her and say, I took this woman, and when I came to her, I found her not a maid, not a virgin. Then shall the father of the damsel and her mother take and bring forth the tokens of the damsel's virginity unto the elders of the city in the gate. And the damsel's father shall say unto the elders, I gave my daughter unto this man to wife, and he hates her. And lo, he hath given occasion of speech against her, saying, I found not thy daughter a maid, and yet these are the tokens of my daughter's virginity. And they shall spread the cloth before the elders of the city. And the elders of that city shall take that man and chastise him. And they shall immerse him in 100 shekels of silver, and give them unto the father of the damsel, because he hath brought up the evil name upon a virgin of Israel. And she shall be his wife, and he may not put her away all his days. But if this thing be true, and the tokens of virginity be not found for the damsel, then they shall bring out the damsel to the door of her father's house, and the men of the city shall stone her with stones that she die, because she hath wrought folly in Israel to play the whore in her father's house. So shalt thou put evil away from you. Now, I'll leave that up so that other people can read it, but there's a lot of things that are interesting, and I've already done a video before about the value and worth of women in the Bible and what their rights are and how they are barely second-class citizens and barely above cattle and other property. The entire passage is about the men involved. It's about if a man takes a wife and doesn't like her, then he complains to her father, and her father then says, hey, I gave this man a virgin, and here's the proof of it. And then if the accusation isn't true, then the man gets fined 100 shekels and he loses his right of divorce and has to stay with her for all of his days. And if it is true, then they stone her to death because she's dishonored her father. The women are absolutely second class in all of this. This is about the father's honor and the husband's honor and everybody priding a virgin. Now, virginity is not a real thing. It's just not. It's at best a mental construct, and it means different things to different people. If you were to do a survey of different civilizations, different people at different times, what counts as virginity? This state of not having had sex, which the term is morphed to be more of an assumed innocence in anything. Like you're a financial virgin. You don't know anything about financial matters, or you've never been to Rocky Horror Picture Show before. You're a Rocky Horror Picture Show virgin. But the concept and the construct of virginity is asinine because it makes us wonder what it is that we're supposed to be valuing. Now, first of all, are we talking about physical virginity, mental virginity, or spiritual virginity? We don't know. And I'll do what I can to kind of address all of them. But for physical virginity, does it mean penis and vagina sex? Does it mean oral sex? I did not have sexual relations. Bill Clinton said he didn't have sex when he had oral sex. It counts. What about anal sex or digital sex? Which of these matters and why? Now, I understand that if somebody's never engaged in sexual intercourse, then there's a less or a lowered chance that they're likely to have any sort of sexually transmitted infection to pass on. So I'm not saying there's no value in determining whether or not somebody had sex, but you can test for STIs and STDs. Not so much back then, but that's not enough to say, hey, you're going to die if you're not a virgin on your wedding bed, or if we can't prove that you're a virgin on your wedding bed. So with physical virginity, there's simply no way to tell for sure for people with wombs whether or not there's a hymen doesn't matter. Because it's entirely possible that someone could have sex and the hymen survived. And it's also possible that hymen could be broken or lost through the normal course of any number of activities, including working, riding horses, masturbation, which I'm sure they would be just as opposed to, etc. But the existence of a hymen doesn't tell you whether or not someone has had sex with another person. It's also incredibly abusive to check for it. Let's bring your daughter out as if she's cattle. We'll check her teeth and we'll try to find out if we can find the hallmarks of her virtue. It's a violation of her bodily autonomy. And since there's no test and no test result that can possibly give you the answer you're looking for, it's incredibly abusive in addition to being invasive. The only test that might be useful at all is whether or not you're pregnant. Because despite the Bible's claim that Mary was a pregnant virgin, we can be supremely confident that if in fact you are pregnant, you had sex, period. There's absolutely zero confirmed cases of someone, a human being, becoming pregnant without having sex. Now, that could change because parthenogenesis is a thing. It's just not observed in humans. And so there's no way to tell for women, but there's really especially no way to tell for men. And the Bible doesn't seem to care and nobody seems to be bothered by it. There's a lot of good reasons for this. One is that it's sensible not to give a shit about somebody's virginity. So I wish we had the exact same treatment for women that we had for men here. But also, there's no expectation that the man needs to be a virgin at all. He might have other wives. He might have concubines. There's just no clear restriction that says, oh, on my wedding night, the man involved needs to be a virgin. So that takes care of physical virginity. What about mental virginity? This notion of you are innocent, and so you are not aware of what sex is, and you haven't experienced it. Now, there are some people who advocate for qualia, which is a philosophical idea that I largely reject, where there's something to the experience that you learn from. Now, I would agree that fantasizing about having sex, never having had it, is going to be different from actually having sex, but so is having sex with person A versus having sex with person B versus having sex with person C. I've had happily just enough sex to know that it's always a little bit different, and that it is somewhat different than whatever fantasies I may have concocted. But apart from that notion of qualia, the Bible has this notion that if you look on a woman with lust, that you've committed adultery in your heart. So there is a certain mental aspect of this where there seems to be some concern for purity or innocence. But the truth is that purity and innocence is as mythological as the unicorn that is supposedly attracted to it. The last category might be spiritual virginity. And this one's really easy because I have no clue what that means, and neither does anybody else. I don't really know what anything spiritual means. People keep using that term. It means so many things to different people. And so what would it mean for your spirit to not be a virgin? Well, first you need to prove that we have a spirit and why I should care about what it experiences, and then demonstrate how it's different from the mental and the physical, etc. What if, though, this individual wasn't a virgin, but through no fault of their own? What if they were involuntarily no longer a virgin? What if it was while they're unconscious and they had no knowledge of it? Does that change anything? Does that change what the Bible is concerned about? Because is it about an actual innocence, which someone could have had, if someone were unconscious and raped, they would still be innocent of actual sex. This wasn't within the realm of their experience. However, they could then have a sexually transmitted infection or a pregnancy, etc. What is it? What is the concern here? And it seems to be all about the father's honor and the husband's honor, and about viewing women entirely as breeding stock. And so if you look at what the passage actually says, when they're trying to assess what the truth is and what the damages are, if the new husband accuses her and she turns out to be innocent, like they're going to bring forth the sheets of the marriage bed to show that there are bloodstains there, which isn't proof of virginity, and a lack of it isn't a proof of non-virginity. So they have horrible tests start to finish for what they're looking for, and no way to demonstrate that what they're looking for is real or that this is the actual state of affairs. But if he accuses her and the elders determine that she's innocent, he has to pay 100 shekels. Now, I've talked about this every time, or almost every time, the Bible starts giving out penalties in shekels about how absolutely stupid it is for God to inspire language that charges 100 shekels, because you would think that God would be able to realize that these books are going to last for thousands of years and that inflation is going to make 100 shekels nothing. I don't know why a God or even these individuals establish a fixed price for her reputation, but 100 shekels and he's stuck with her. And that money gets paid to the father. That money doesn't get paid to her. It's not her name that was tarnished by him accusing her of not being a virgin. It was her father's. She doesn't get to really own property or have money or be of value. So it's like if you get married and you don't like it, you might as well, if you've got the 100 shekels lying around, you might as well accuse her of not being a virgin, because if they can't prove that she is, you're free, and don't have to keep taking care of her. If she accuses her and she's guilty, they stone her to death because she's her father's property and she devalued that property. He raised a daughter. He would have rather raised a son because sons can help take care of the property and can inherit the property. But a daughter's only value is in, selling her off to someone to form an alliance or an allegiance, or here, you're going to take care of her now. This is the thinking that is behind these passages. It's absolutely vile. And to think that someone, merely for being incapable of demonstrating that they hadn't had sex with someone else, would be stoned to death, whether they did or not, is wholly immoral and unjust. And this is what's in the Bible. Now, I know. There's going to be some Christians who are like, hang on a minute. Like, for example, Ray Comfort, there was another passage further down in Deuteronomy, in this same chapter, that talks about how if a young virgin woman is not betrothed but is sexually assaulted by someone, that he has to then marry her. And Ray, in a discussion about this, basically said no father has ever or would ever force his daughter to marry someone against her will. So first of all, that's not true. It's absolutely ridiculous of Ray or anybody else to say it. I mean, we have fathers who commit hate crimes against their daughters on a regular basis. The notion that somebody would force their daughter to marry someone against their will isn't remotely as outlandish as Ray would like to hope that it is. But it's the same thing here. If somebody comes up with an excuse that says, hey, they wouldn't actually stone her to death for this. Why? What's your justification? And it doesn't matter, because if humans weren't doing it, that just means they're not following the book that they believe is inspired by God with specific rules. They don't get to just decide, oh, this rule we're going to ignore and the other rule we're not. That's not the way any of this works. Why would God tell people or inspire people to write down instructions for them to do the immoral thing, and for the Christians who are like, well, they were already doing this, so this might soften it? No, they did it with slavery. Oh, they were already keeping slaves, so God did his best to make slavery less harmful. No, the way God could make slavery less harmful is to say, thou shalt not own another human being as property. And the way God can make this less harmful is, thou shalt not treat women as property. Thou shalt not invade someone's personal bodily autonomy. Thou shalt not give a rat's ass whether the person you married was a virgin or not. It's a bunch of insecure men is what it is. In the end, women are property in the Bible and barely ever anything else. Matter of fact, most of the time, they're not even named other than somebody's wife, somebody's daughter, somebody's spouse. Stoning someone to death for having premarital sex is already pretty vile, but doing it to the woman while the men pay a 100 shekel fine for potentially lying in what would have caused death. I mean, if I were to tell a lie that would have resulted in somebody else's death, and my penalty is that I get fined for that, we already have an incredible incredibly inequitable system. But at worst, this demonstrates that the Bible is clearly misogynistic, and that if there is a God, then either he's misogynistic to support or endorse or inspire those misogynistic views, or he's misogynistic for not clearly correcting the book that is supposedly written based on his inspiration. Like, if I gave people an instruction book, I didn't write it myself, but if I talked to them or inspired them to write an instruction book, and their instruction book said all kinds of things that were in direct opposition to what I actually valued, what my character valued, like individual autonomy, liberty, freedom, those things. If instead they had written down that it was okay to have slaves and to forcibly checks to find out if somebody was a virgin on their wedding night, etc., I would have a duty to correct that, especially since this is something that wouldn't, cost me anything. It doesn't cost God anything to show up and correct all the awful things that are done in his name, which means that either he's A-okay with them, or he doesn't exist, or he's grossly immoral. In any of those cases, I want nothing to do with him. There's absolutely no justification for this passage. And it's another in a long line of verses that Christians and Jews have absolutely no sensible response for. Why this passage says what it says. If it's not consistent with God, then he either endorses it or fails to correct it. The passage has the girl's father speaking about how he gave her to this man. The girl's father is required to present the bloody sheets and the tokens of her virginity. The elders then chastise the man or stone the woman to death. The Bible is misogynistic garbage, and everybody should be familiar with passages like these, because no one who points to love thy neighbor, turn the other cheek, forgiveness, all of those things, which are not bad, have no excuse for why the same book has vile passages like this in there that devalues over half the planet in order to prop up insecure men and a fictional God. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.